Eugene Simopoulos. My question has to do with what Scientologists do when they become emotionally distressed, angry, down, hopeless, etc., in the face of everyday normal human challenges of life. For example, in the monotheistic religions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, practitioners will pray to a higher power for guidance, support, etc., or consult with a pastor/priest. What is the usual Scientologist response? Do they immediately contact their auditor and go to their local org? Read LRH? Are there more immediate interventions they employ? I don't believe they're totally incapable of emotions, despite their attempts to bury their humanity with TRs, auditing, and other processes. Great question, Eugene, and thank you very much for asking me this. And absolutely, Scientologists experience the same full range of emotions as anybody else. The problem is that they try to suppress a lot of those emotions, and they are experiencing them, but then they are suppressing them. And that is where a lot of these, a lot of psychological damage can come when you are doing this on a chronic, long-term basis. You can cause yourself some real chemical problems over years of doing this kind of thing. I'm not suggesting in any way that, if you, are having a bad day and you're trying to keep it to yourself, that there's something psychologically wrong with that. There isn't. But over a long, long term of not being able to express yourself or express how you feel, that is where there can be problems. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. But you had just a great question here. So let's go ahead and go over some things that Scientologists do. Now, you will find a wide range of responses here. It is not any one thing or even two things. But some of the things you mentioned in your question are definitely what Scientologists do. There are Scientologists who are very addicted to the auditing process or the euphoria or fervor that they can feel as a result of the auditing process. And so they try to go get a session. I knew a lady back in Santa Barbara who every time she had the slightest little dip in her day, I need to go talk to an auditor, and she would go rush into the org and she would get on the e-meter and she would try to tell somebody what was going on with her. And she, every little frowny face deserved was basically a 10-alarm fire for her because she wanted to be in this constant state of blissful euphoria, right? And that's not a very realistic expectation. So she was, troubled and quickly ran out of money as she was going in and out of sessions trying to, get this sorted out. That was a rather unique, extreme example. I didn't see a lot of people acting that way in Scientology, but they were there. You also have advices like, what would Ron do? This is a question that Scientologists will ask themselves all the time when faced with a dilemma or problem or situation, and they're like, well, I don't know what to do here. Well, shoot, let me think. What would Ron Hubbard do right now? And within their knowledge of Hubbard's policies and issues and writings and whatever, their think about him, that's how they'll approach the problem, is how they think he would approach it. This is one of those things where, again, one or two times, or, as a sort of general sort of way of approaching life, there certainly isn't anything wrong with trying to look at things from a different perspective. But as we've gone over in Scientology, you are actually having personality change over time because of the indoctrination and the viewpoint changes and demands that are made on you by the social pressures. You are going to change your views, and those views will change and skew more in the direction of L. Ron Hubbard's views, because that's the single source of most of the indoctrination. So your personality will shift and change over time, and so you'll be actually acting like L. Ron Hubbard would act in circumstances that previously you never would have acted that way, right? That's one of those bad influences that can happen in these cultic groups. So again, it's a matter of volume or extremism, right, of that. So that's another way, another coping mechanism that they'll use, though. Remember that Scientology also has been marketing itself for the last 20 years as a toolkit for life, a bunch of practical solutions that you can utilize in order to solve the problems of your life. And some of those solutions have limited degrees of workability in certain circumstances. For example, when in doubt, communicate. That's a Scientology maxim, and it's not a bad one. If you run into problems with somebody in an interpersonal relationship conflict kind of situation, generally hashing it out is a good idea. Not under every circumstance, not when the person's an abuser. That's where you got to get some distance between you, for example. But when you're dealing with the run-of-the-mill average problems of life, you're not dealing with abusers. So communication, guidance, and help with that is a good thing. And people in Scientology generally will approach things from a maybe overly confrontational point of view, actually. But though having grown up in that environment and now dealing with the real world and the passive aggressiveness of it and the fact that people won't often confront you or be honest with you about things, there's a cost benefit ratio to be, run on. Is it a good idea to talk to people about things when you're upset, or isn't it? Well, it depends on the person and the situation, but you get where I'm going with that. So that is a way that Scientologists will sometimes deal with things, is they'll just try to tackle the source of the problem as they see it and try to hash it out with communication. And like I said, sometimes that works and sometimes it's only makes things worse. So it depends. As far as going into their orgs, there are other services or other avenues of help within a Scientology organization. You have an ethics officer who is not only there to abuse you and demand money out of you for all of your sins that you've confessed in sessions, but ethics officers do sometimes help people. And I did many, many, many ethics cycles, as they were called. You sit down and you do an ethics cycle. We're going to have this conversation. We're going to take Hubbard's ethics technology. We're going to take his methods of, his little formulas of what condition are you in, and is it the greatest good for the greatest number, and, running these kind of calculations and sort of evaluating your moral stances on things. And if it's a moral issue you're having a problem with or some moral conundrum, then an ethics officer can help sort it out using the Scientology policies. Sometimes that's beneficial, sometimes it is not. Again, context specific. More often than not, though, it's always going to lean in the direction of benefits to the church, almost exclusively. And that's, again, where you get that sort of cultic flavor to all of this. So, but accidentally, despite Scientology, ethics officers sometimes will actually give material or useful assistance to church parishioners who are having troubles. Another person that they will see who is more likely to be helpful is the chaplain. And the chaplain is sort of the port of last call, as Hubbard describes it in Scientology orgs. It's a person you can go see who's not supposed to be judgmental, who is supposed to really just sit there and listen and understand and really be, if anybody's supposed to be on your side, it's the chaplain. And sometimes, again, it's a bit of a coin toss as to what's going to happen, because at the end of the day, as much as the chaplain might be on your side, it can be a little bit of one of those human resources kind of issues, right? In other words, in corporations, there's the view that human resources is there to help employees, but there's also the very, cynical view that human resources exists only to service the company, and they are only there to protect the organization itself, and they're really only pretending to be interested in you. I can't speak to whether that is or isn't broadly true across corporate America, but that's, what I've heard and been told. So this, in a similar way, the chaplain in a church of Scientology might put on a front. I can tell you that they will put on a front of caring and listening, and they really do care, and they really will listen. But when it comes time to figure out what to do, if what needs to be done is in any way going to negatively impact the local church or Scientology in general, then the chaplain's advice is going to be directed, to direct you away from that behavior or activity. They don't, they are Scientologists first. Chaplain second, friend third, sort of thing in terms of their priorities. So, but you do have these resources, and it's not even something that you're going to have to pay for if you're going to go see the chaplain. That's just a conversation or somebody who can help you. The bigger problem in most Scientology churches is they don't have chaplains. Most churches don't have a single posted person whose job is just to be the chaplain. And so you'll end up talking to some executive who's holding that function as part of their job. It's called holding from above. And because on the organizational chart, they're above that post, so they're responsible for every function below them. So those are the kind of things they'll do. Now, also growing up as a Scientologist and as a second generation member, when there were conflicts or issues at home, sometimes we were, like with my brother, we were made to sit down and do TRs. And we would just, as kids, we'd have to sit and stare at each other for a while, right? And of course, it's equivalent to kind of a timeout, sort of an enforced, be nice to your brother sort of thing. But, forcing you to sit there and look at each other for a while after a while, the anger dies down and, you kind of chill out. So that would happen sometimes, or we would consult Hubbard writings. I was experiencing bullying as a kid in school, and I was advised to, with Hubbard references, there was this story that the ethics officer of the mission, this is in Pasadena when I was growing up, the ethics officer of the mission sat me down and went over this Hubbard reference about how he had encountered bullies growing up in Nebraska or Montana or wherever. And he had climbed up on top of a fence one by one and tackled and beaten up these kids, this gang of kids who were terrorizing the neighborhood, one by one, starting with the smallest one and working his way up, is how Hubbard claimed he dealt with this group. And after he had beaten up the first two kids, then the rest of them ran every time he showed up. Probably total nonsense, probably a tall tale. But that's the kind of, that's the way I was advised to deal with bullying. And I wasn't a fighter in school at all. So that advice didn't really work out for me so well. But that was what I was advised to do. Anyway, so there you go.